Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint this super spooky ghost to finish off the Halloween season. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials. Now let's get started. Okay, for today's painting, I have a 5x7" canvas, and you can absolutely do this on a larger canvas. I just don't have a brush large enough that I'm comfortable doing this technique with. So I'm going to stick to a little canvas, and I've just put a pretty generous coat of black paint on here. So I'm going to put out just a little bit of titanium white, and I am using the heavy body paints, but you could use basics if you prefer. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to put out a little bit of Mars black, also in the heavy body. I just used basics on the background here though. I'm going to use matte medium here instead of water. And the reason for that is because I want to work in very thin layers. Now if I'm using water here to thin these layers down, since I'm putting layer upon layer upon layer, if I underbind that paint with too much water, the next layer, even if the first one is completely dry, it will wipe it off and they'll start to blend and get kind of a weird look. And I just want to avoid that. So matte medium is going to help my paint be very transparent, but keep it very structurally sound so I don't wipe it off later. I'm going to start with my number 8 filbert, and I'm just going to load up with some matte medium and a bit of white. We'll keep this first layer pretty transparent, and I'm just going to basically do the shape of my ghost. So I know that I want a head, so we'll just kind of go like that. See, I'm working very loosely. I know there's going to be a bit of a shoulder over here somewhere. This one's going to come down here for another shoulder, and the arm will come out generally about like that. Now, there's no reason to try and get this perfect on the first go, because each layer we can hide things we don't like, and that's also going to help make our ghost seem very ethereal, like he's blending into the background or kind of arising out of it. I am going to try and keep fairly soft lines, so I'm using very light pressure. You see I'm just barely touching the canvas. I have quite a bit of paint on my brush, but see I'm not really applying much until I put a little bit more pressure down. I'm just going to take this pretty much straight down. I'm not worried about the breaks where the canvas shows through it all. And you do want to wait until this background is dry. Don't try and do this on top of wet black paint, because then the black and the white are just going to blend together and it's going to look strange. We're not doing any blending in this painting. It's all layers. Everything is layers. On his sleeve here, I'm going to pull it down in kind of random ways. Some parts will be longer, some parts will be shorter. I'm not worried about seeing brush stroke lines or anything. Let's take that about down to the bottom there. And just break up that line a little bit. Tiny bit more white and matte medium. See, doesn't have to look like anything in particular. Doesn't have to be beautiful at this point. Now we are going to work in lots of layers, lots and lots of layers, and we need each layer to be dry before the next one. So I'm just going to finish up this first layer of his shape, and then I'm going to let him dry completely. It will take, let's see, it's pretty dry climate here. It might take about 15 minutes because I use this paint pretty thin. Okay, I think that's good. We'll give him about 15 minutes to dry. All right, our ghost is dry, so I'm going to make sure my filbert is dry, and we're going to start on our black layers. So again, I'm going to load up with matte medium. I'm being careful not to pick up any white that might have been in there. Quite a bit of matte medium and a bit of black. See how thin and transparent that black is. I'm going to start down here and just start shaping, mostly coming from the bottom up, and see already we're getting kind of an ethereal, layered, kind of blended out look. So this is actually really similar to how we did the boards on the house in the haunted house video. It's just different directions and putting a little bit more energy into where those colors are going. I am starting with a very thin layer of black right now, but I'm going to go back and deepen it a bit in a little bit. I'm just going to start shaping this. And I'm not worried about if I accidentally take my black up too far. If I do that and I decide I don't like that layer, it's not a big deal. So I just did that to show you that I'm not worried about making boo-boos here. So don't be afraid to make a boo-boo. There's nothing wrong with it. Anything can be fixed. That's the great thing about working in layers. Lay down quite a bit there. And the reason I'm going up with this black is so that I don't get brush ends. You know, if I start here, I might get like a little curve from the top of the filbert, and I don't want to do that. So here now, I can start saying some of these little pieces that got outside that I don't want there, I picked up a little bit of a heavier black mixture, and I can go over it, and so it's gone. Same thing on the head here. Now, one thing that's going to be important with our ghost is we want to make sure that we have both hard and soft edges. You don't want everything to be blurred out and soft. You don't want everything to have hard edges. So kind of decide, on my ghost, I've decided I want his shroud to kind of be blending into the background. And that goes for the bottom and the edges. I want to make it look like his head is either facing us a little bit or maybe turned to the side ever so slightly. And so we're going to give that look by putting a hard edge on this side and fading this side out. If this side is faded out, it's going to look like we're seeing a little bit more of the back of his head than on this side. So to do that, I'm going to pick up a bit of a heavier amount of black, still the matte medium, and I'm going to come in here and just kind of start carving that out. I want to keep his shoulders soft, so I picked up a bit of matte medium just on the end of my brush, and I'm going to make sure that I don't have a hard line there with the black. But see, I have a hard edge there, and now I'm going to take my matte medium black mixture and kind of start fading out back here. So I'm just laying down the black, not worried about what that looks like just yet. A little bit of matte medium right on the end of my brush, and smooth out anything that got to be too hard of a line there. I also want the top edge of his arm to have a hard edge. It's going to look like it's coming forward just a little bit. So I'm going to take this and just make sure I've got a fairly good edge, for the most part, on his arm. Maybe up here at his shoulder, I'll blend it out just a little bit more. Oops, that was a bit much. And we'll make sure that this kind of blends back. If you get too much and you don't want to worry about covering it later, just pick up a little bit more matte medium and it'll smooth it out. So I just did that right there. I had a big blob of black, picked up a little bit of matte medium and kind of wiped it away. We can also start looking at the interior of his cloak and deciding where we want some shadows. So I feel like I'm going to want some shadow right here in his face to say that his cloak is open and there's not really anything in there. So I got a heavy mixture of black with my matte medium. And I'll keep the edges of his cloak pretty solid right there on the interior. Make your ghost look however you want. You could do this a really pretty ghost in a long flowing dress, or you could keep him really spooky looking. And I'm going to take that down, a little bit of matte medium, and just let that kind of fade out. And we can play with that opening of his cloak and change the shape as we go. I also feel like I'm going to want a shadow here. I just turned my filbert on its edge so I could get a smaller line. Lay down some paint and kind of blur it out with the matte medium. Let's put just a few little shadows here in the ripples of his cloak and the folds. And maybe just a little bit along, not all the way along the edge, but just a hint under where I think his arm would be. So his arm has a little bit of mass, and then I'm gonna say there's just a bit of a shadow underneath there. Now, whenever we do shadows and highlights, you guys always ask me, how do I know where to put the shadows and the highlights? And some of you don't like my answer, but my answer is always, you put those shadows and highlights where you think they need to be. That's the only answer there is. I also feel like we'd have a little bit of a shadow right here, maybe where his other arm is just hanging down. So I'm gonna take my filbert on the edge and just generally streak in a bit of a shadow and blend out the edges. Let's get rid of some of those fuzzy marks right at the bottom where we have the white still showing. And I think that's pretty good for now. I'm gonna let him dry again, and we'll come back and we'll start adding some white. Okay, if you're painting this along with me, then you may get to this point and think, oh, this is so awful. Mine looks terrible, why can't I do it? But I want you to look at mine really close. Let's zoom in, hopefully it's not too blurry. So look at how bizarre mine looks. This doesn't look layered. That doesn't look like shadows. It looks, I mean, it looks layered, but it just looks like black streaks on top of white streaks, and we've got fuzz here, and this just looks strange. It doesn't look like the ethereal kind of melting into the background ghost that we're going for. So if you're at this point and you're ready to throw in the towel, you think your ghost looks horrible, don't. Keep going. Know that this is an ugly stage. And actually, I've noticed that when starting on the black background and then starting with a white layer, every time I put the black over top of it, it looks like that. The black looks really phony and disconnected from everything else. But watch, next we're gonna do a white layer, and as we start to layer that white back over it, it pushes that black back a little bit more, and that black is gonna start looking like shadows rather than these random streaks. So let's go ahead and do that. So my filbert, I dried off on a paper towel, and I'm gonna load up with some more matte medium. Notice I'm using quite a bit of matte medium. And then I'm gonna pull just a bit of white out and mix the matte medium on my brush with it. I encourage you to make your mixture a little more transparent than you think you need at first. If it's not opaque enough, you can get more. But if you make it too opaque and end up covering up all of these layers you just worked for, then you're gonna have a hard time. All of these layers serve a purpose, so don't cover anything up unless you don't wanna see it anymore. All right, so let's go ahead and start defining his arm. So I'm just using the very tip of my filbert. And his cloak is kind of wrinkly, so it doesn't have to be straight, but I do want a crisp line. And I know I want to have a hand coming out of his sleeve right here, and I want to make it look like there's a bit of the cloak hanging down behind his hand so that it looks like his cloak is open here. So what I'm going to do is kind of pull this to the side and down just a little bit, make a bit of a brighter edge here. Now can you see this bit that you can barely see looks like it's behind this part in the front. Now what I'm doing with my brush here is, I'm using the lightest pressure that I can, but instead of flat, I've kind of turned it onto the edge just a little bit, super light pressure. I am barely touching the canvas, and I'm just letting it kind of streak down. See how I get those little wispy bits? I'm gonna break up this line. I might have talked too much and now I have a solid line there. Just picked up a little bit of matte medium, kind of re-wet that paint a bit. There we go, got rid of that line. Now I can start streaking this down over top and see how where it covers that black, now that black doesn't look quite so phony. And just by turning my filbert on its edge just a little bit, I get these thin little lines. If that's not something you're comfortable with, reserve the filbert for this area here and then get a smaller brush like a long liner or even like a number 2 round brush and do that there. Sometimes when I take my filbert down, I get a little bit of a hard edge. See that harder edge there? And I'll leave that because it's going to insinuate kind of a wrinkle, kind of a fold in the cloak. Now, because I am working on layers that are going to be a bit more prominent, I want to make sure I'm not getting that kind of skip on the canvas texture. So I'm going to put a little bit more pressure there with more matte medium because that's going to help smooth it out. And I like this, but I don't want it to be solid on both sides, so I'm just going to swipe out one half of it, leave the other half nice and solid. Right over top of that shadow we did, but see how transparent? You can still see the shadow. A little more matte medium only to really ghost out that white. Let's keep going with that. I'm going to pick up a bit more white because my brush was getting pretty dry. And right here at his shoulder. Let's keep that shoulder fairly solid. I might dust it out a little bit up here. Just right there a bit. A little more matte medium because I don't want to lose this shadow completely that I put in right there. See how as I started flat and as I dragged it down, I slowly turned my brush to its edge, but the key is pressure. If you have too much pressure, you're going to get fat lines, and that's fine if that's what you want, but if that's not what you want, check the pressure on your brush. I have my wrist right on the table. It's just my wrist bone here. It's not my hand flat. If it's just my wrist, I can maintain all of the motion that I need. I can move my hand completely, but it's stable, so my pressure doesn't change just by resting that bone on the table. If I'm hovering, I may have a harder time getting the pressure that I want. All right, now we can start kind of playing with the folds in his cloak. So I'm using the edge of my brush kind of rolled to its side a bit. Light pressure. And see how it pushes a little bit of a bead of white to the interior. That's why I'm doing that. Rather than using a round brush, which is just going to give me a smooth line, if I roll my filbert to its edge, it helps push the paint inward. And then I get a softer edge on the other side. Let's do that on the other side here. So I'm rolling it on the edge again toward the opening. Smooth out that back line. A little bit of matte medium. I put a little pressure there so I could get a bit more of the white paint. Again, I don't want to lose that shadow. And let's get like a little traily bit there. And if you decide you don't like that traily bit, just a little bit of matte medium to smooth it out. I feel like I need just a little bit there though. I just didn't like the place that I had it. I'm going to put it closer to the opening of his cloak. And just let it disappear. Bit of matte medium and just smooth out that back line. And again, tell yourself this isn't my final layer. So if you're not really liking where you're putting these elements, if you lost too much of your black, none of that matters. I just picked up matte medium there. Make sure this stays nice and faded and kind of ethereal looking. And wherever I start to get canvas texture, I just pick up a tiny bit more matte medium and just smooth that out immediately. Now the thing here with our ghost is there's no limit to the layers that you can do. So don't feel like you have to do it in a couple of layers, and don't feel like you have to do it in as many layers as I do. I have no idea how many layers I'm going to do on him. I mean, for your sake, I'm going to try and keep it to as few as possible. But if I end up doing, let's say, 2 layers of each and call it good, but at that point you still feel like you could use more layers on yours, by all means do it. And if after the 1 layer of each you feel like that's exactly what you were going for, great, leave it. I didn't do anything with his cloak here at his head because I feel like my filbert's a little too big. So I'm gonna wash that off, and I'm gonna go to my number 4 filbert. Same brush, just a little smaller. Load it up with some matte medium and some white. I'm gonna use it exactly the way I did the number 8. So I'm gonna roll it to its side and kind of push some of that toward his face on his cloak. Tiny point of matte medium and blend out this line back here with super light pressure. Same thing here on the edge. Roll that in toward his face. And notice I'm keeping that edge kind of crinkly, it's not straight. He's got a big, flowing, scary ghost robe on. So it might not be real crisp and straight. And right here as I come to this side, I'm keeping that edge nice and crisp. So see, it's starting to fade out here. It's nice and crisp here. It looks like he's kind of facing this direction a bit. Okay, now I have a few layers on here, and while each layer is dry to the touch, after a little while they do start to get a little sticky. So I might give him about 30 minutes or so before I come back and add the next layer of black. All right, this is perfectly dry now, so we can continue. I'm gonna go back to my number 8 filbert, and I'm gonna start kind of cleaning up some of these edges here. So some matte medium, and I'm gonna get a bit of a heavier mixture of black. So my black is not gonna be quite as transparent as before because I'm gonna start working on the details of my ghost. So like right around here where I want this edge to be nice and crisp, I'm gonna come in with that heavy black mixture, apply it a bit heavier, and start taking some of those pieces away. Again, I want this edge to stay nice and ghostly and kind of fogged out, so I'm just gonna wait on that. I'll get to that in a minute. I might kick some of these pieces in just a bit. See how now he's got a little bit more of a wrinkle there in his cloak. Let's give it a little corner kind of. There, I like that. And I'll pick up just a hint of matte medium right on the end of my brush, and we'll work on kind of fading this part out just a bit more. Super light pressure. I'm mostly just touching the matte medium that's on my brush to the canvas and letting it pull any bits of black that it does off of the brush. Same back here a little. And right here where I want his arm to be a bit more solid, I have a bit of fuzzing in the back that I don't like. So we'll just take that heavier black mixture again and clean that up. Just completely get rid of that. I'm gonna pick up a point of matte medium, see, just like a little pinpoint, and I'm gonna bring a bit of that black in here and just say there's a little bit of a shadow right there. I don't want it quite that solid, but I'm just letting it be for now. I can fix that up in just a minute. So see, I just pulled a bit of a shadow in there. And I'll just wipe some of that off. A little bit more matte medium. And kind of streak that. And if it's still too strong, when I add my next layer of white, I can take care of that. There, I like that. Now he's got a little hint of a shadow there. I want to play with those shadows a bit throughout his cloak. In fact, to work on those details a little bit more, I'm going to go back to my number 4 filbert. Medium, and I'm just going to pick that black up that I threw back down. right here, I want his cloak to seem very solid right there. Maybe like it's bunched up, but then it's kind of pulled back just a little bit. And to give that illusion, I'm gonna add a bit of a shadow right here behind this edge. Not a ton. I'm still using the edge of my brush. I'm just gonna kind of lay some of that in there. So right now I'm just laying down the paint. I'm not worried about it blending or fading out. Little point of matte medium. And then I can kind of smooth it a little bit more. And remember, just like before, when you add the black over the white, it kind of looks phony. So don't worry about that right now. Just know that when you go back with the white, you'll be able to take care of any of that. So now he's got a bit of a shadow there. I think I'm going to extend that up into here to meet up with the shadow we put in his shoulder. Let yourself get really detailed here if you like. Really get in really small and play with those little details. I think the more you do, the more dimension he's going to have. If you just kind of streak it all on there and let it be, he's going to lose some of that dimension. Let's get a bit of a shadow here too. And actually, I feel like his shoulder's up a little high right here. So I'm going to bring some of that in. I'm going to pop a piece of his cloak out here. Like that. Just telling myself where those shadows are going to be. A little more matte medium. And blend that out. I am leaving a hard edge on the left of this shadow because the cloak is kind of overlapping that. And I'll work on his shoulder here a bit more to bring it down a bit. He just kind of looked hunched. And I feel like his arm comes out a little far here, so I just picked up black. There's a bit of matte medium on my brush. And I'm gonna lightly dust this just to bring his arm in a bit. Very, very light pressure. When you get too much of the canvas texture, just a little point of matte medium to smooth that back. Heavier pressure to lay down that black paint. A little point of medium to smooth it out. Now all that matte medium I laid down there is pretty wet, so trying to smooth it much more is just kind of uncovering some spots. So I'm just going to get rid of this line, and then I'm going to let that dry, and obviously that's way darker than I want his shoulder to be, but I'm not worried about it. Just getting rid of hard lines. I'll let it dry and I'll come back to it. So let's work on the bottom of his shroud for a minute. Back to my number 8, lots of matte medium, and a nice thin-ish version of my black. Not terribly thin, but obviously not solid, see? And starting from the bottom, remember where on the white, how I kind of started flat, and as I came down, I rolled it a bit? I can do the same thing here. So as I come up, I'm kind of rolling it a bit. And I've got this dark crease of a shadow there. Dust it out a little here and there. And we'll come over to this side of his cloak. Up on the inside, I don't want to lose all of the light on the inside. I want a hint of a reflection of that white in there. So I don't want a pure black here, but I may go pretty close to pure black right in here. You could even give him like some little creepy glowing eyes in there. I almost did, but ultimately I really liked the very solid black. It felt much more mysterious. So we'll do that part really solid. I'll pick up a little bit of matte medium and just streak that down. I've got a small hint of the white still showing in there, and I may go back and add just a little bit more. A little bit of matte medium, and let's kind of boost some of these shadows. So I'm kind of going by what I see. So I already see a shadow there. I want to make sure I keep that shadow, so I'm just getting in there, keeping that shadow fairly dark, using the edge of my brush. Same thing here, I kind of see a little bit of a shadow in there. And we'll dust out lightly some of these streaks here. Don't forget, when you're doing the black, it's harder if you start here and drag down, because then you get that rounded point from the filbert like I just had. So it's easier if you start with really light pressure at the bottom and drag up and just let it kind of fade. Let's do a bit over here. I've got quite a bit of that canvas texture showing, and I don't want that. So I'm dusting over that to get rid of it. And I also kind of lost the shadow that I wanted to insinuate in here. Can you see how thin that black is? It's almost just leaving the faintest hint of the black there. Barely any gray at all. Just enough to give us a hint that there might be a shadow there. And then this part of his sleeve, which is behind, I'm going to get in pretty dark right up here where his hand is going to be. A little bit of matte medium and streak that down. I just barely want to see that part. Okay, I think he's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with him so far. I'm almost feeling like he might need, well, he obviously needs one more coat of white. I need to work on the black on this shoulder because he's kind of got a square shoulder right now. And that's actually dry enough that I think I can do that. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit more black and start dusting out the shape. Just want that shoulder to completely disappear into the distance. Super light pressure. I can't even feel my brush touching the canvas, but I know it is because I'm seeing the tiniest hints of paint coming off. Stand back and look at it from a distance to really tell how fogged out it is. It's kind of hard to tell right in front of it. And when I stand back to look at it, I almost feel like that part right here just bulges outward just a bit too much. So I'm just going to dust that. There we go. Much better. Don't get impatient and start putting lots of pressure to lay down a layer all in one swipe. I think you're going to be much happier with it. And honestly, I think it's really meditative to paint like this, to just build those layers slowly and let them see what they're going to do. There is just one more thing I want to do before we let him dry to move on to the white, and that is right here at the top of his arm. I feel like that's a little bit solid. I want to give the indication that there's some folds in his robe up here. So I'm back to my number 4 filbert. You could use a round brush for this if that's what you have and that's what you're the most comfortable with, or you could use, you could use an angle brush, you could use a liner, whatever you want to use. Just because I'm using a filbert doesn't mean you have to. Now this color I want to keep very, very thin. I don't want to put big black shadows in there. Can you see how thin that color is? And these folds can be anywhere that you think. I'm going to kind of take a cue from what's going on in here. So this looks like a nice deep ripple, and I kind of see it coming all the way up to his arm. So I'm going to start right about there and pull. Notice it's kind of at a curve. It's not straight, it's curved because it's laying over his arm. I did go just a tiny bit darker. Right there. Little point of matte medium to blend out that line. I know, that looks horrible. It does, it looks weird. It doesn't look like a fold, it looks like a stripe on his arm. So can you see this teeny tiny little point of white right there? I took some black and I'm just gonna cut that point off. That starts forming the shape of his robe. I might even cut some of this off just a little bit. So now there's a bit of a fold, a crease in his robe. I'm just going to do that very lightly, very generally in just a few places. So I might put you in time lapse for this. It's just the same thing. I know I keep beating a dead horse here, but guys, please make sure that you're focused on the pressure of your brush. The tiniest amount of paint that you put down is going to make a big difference. So if you put down too much, you're gonna struggle. Just a tiny bit. See, I laid down, that's pretty dark, but I didn't lay down a lot of it. Wipe it off, a little bit of matte medium, and super, super light pressure. Barely touching. Like I said, I can't even feel the brush touching the canvas. I just see the result of it, and that's all I need. All right, now while that dries, I'm gonna zoom in super close here and we're gonna work on his hand. Now don't let his hand intimidate you. It's gonna be 3 very simple shapes. And I'm gonna go down to my number 0 round brush. It's just a very small round. And I'm gonna load up with matte medium. A lot of matte medium, mostly matte medium, and just a little point of white. I just poked into the white and then mixed that on my brush here. I don't want his hand to be too solid white. All right, first we're gonna do his long finger that's pointing out, and we're gonna don't come right from the top of his cloak, because that's gonna take away some of the mass from his cloak and make it look very thin and flat. So I'm gonna start from right about here and just lightly kind of sketch outward. Let the paint do what it's gonna do. If he's got a gnarly, bumpy hand, that's good. See these short brush strokes? And that's about it. It's just like a little curved line. Now we're gonna do his thumb. So if he's pointing, his thumb is gonna kind of be, right there. So right about from here, I'm gonna do the same brush stroke. I'm just kind of streaking it and up. Now his other fingers behind his pointer finger, they're still there. And we're just gonna give the tiniest indication of them. We don't have to draw all of them. All we're gonna do is say there's a highlight on these ones right there. Look at that, it's 3 simple shapes, that's it. Let me get just a little bit more of that and we'll start filling it out. So this top finger is gonna be very, very thin and pointy at the end. And as it comes back, it's gonna widen just a bit. I might even take that out just a little bit longer. There we go. Now his thumb, again, it's a little pointier on the end, and as it comes back, it too widens. This finger, or those fingers in the back, I'm just gonna leave for now. I'm not gonna do anything else because I don't wanna see them. I just wanna see a tiny reflection of light there, and that will tell your brain that there's 4 other fingers back there. Now that I have the shape, I am gonna go in and grab a little poke more white. That's all I did, was just kind of poke into it like that. Just mix it in my little matte medium spot. So this is gonna be just a little bit more opaque than the other layer. I'm holding my brush kind of flat. I'm not doing this. And I'm gonna start just kind of insinuating the highlights at the top. Remember, he's got some knuckles, so maybe put just a little pokey-uppy bit there. Grabbed a little point of matte medium, and I'm gonna smooth out that bottom line. So you just kind of pull it over. I'll give him another little knuckle there. And a nice bright spot right on the end of his finger. Same on his thumb. Go a little bit brighter right here. And right there. And that's about it. Now we're gonna let him dry completely, and then we'll come back and we will work on, let's see, on his cloak, we're gonna work on white, and on his hand, we'll start throwing in a little bit of black. All right, that layer's dry. Back to my number 8 and some white. And I kind of feel like this is gonna be my last layer. I might come in and just do a little touch up here and there, but I don't feel like I need to do too many more layers over the entire image. So we're just gonna kind of kick back some of these dark areas and pop some of these brighter areas. Keep that edge nice and solid there. Yeah, this is looking pretty much exactly the way I wanted it to. Now right here where it looked super phony, where I put that black, see, I just took a little bit of that white lightly over it, and now it looks a little bit more like a crease. And my white is pretty thin. Never be afraid to use your finger to blend. That was a bit dark. See how I just went right over it, but because that white is so thin, it's still there. I'm going to take a bit of a bright spot right in there. And I think I'm going to put you into time-lapse now for this, because all I'm doing is just kind of kicking back some of those shadows just a little bit, not covering them. And let's bring his shoulder back. Still that very thin white. I'll apply it a little bit heavier, but because it's so thin, we still have all those shadows back there. And we can add in just a few little spots to keep it from being too transparent. I mean, I want it to fade into the background, but I don't want it to look disconnected from his body. And right now I feel like it's so dark, it kind of looks a little more disconnected than I want. So I just picked up a tiny bit more white and mixed it with that matte medium on my brush. And I'm gonna come into right here and lay down a bit of that heavier white. and just dust it out. Maybe even just a little bit more than that. But see, this is still very thin white, very, very thin. There we go. That's what I was looking for. A little matte medium to smooth out some of those brush marks. And let's give him a little traily bit there. Now, I did lose a bit of the light in there that I want to keep. So I'm going to get a bit more matte medium and just mix it with that white on my brush. Very transparent here, very light pressure. I'm just going to lay in some of that here. A little bit of matte medium to just smooth it out. And see, it's such a subtle difference, but it's going to be very effective. I know that sometimes when we paint with acrylic, we tend to maybe oversaturate colors. But see, just a couple small swipes of a super transparent white was enough to give us a bit of depth back there that we had lost. And that's really it. The last thing I'm going to do before I finish his hand is just go back to my number 0 round brush, and I'm just going to pop a few bright, pure white highlights with no matte medium, mostly around his hood and along the ridges of his cloak here, maybe a couple on the folds on his sleeve. I might get just a point of matte medium just to smooth out the paint a little bit. I'm not trying to make this transparent. I'm not using a ton of paint, but it is mostly pure white. I'll zoom you in a bit, and I'm going to come in here and right where I feel like it would be the brightest, I'm just kind of touching some of this white on there. I'm not going to outline all of his hood. Definitely here around his face, right in tight against that black. Make sure I just kind of break up the line behind it. Good amount of pressure to lay down the paint, and super light pressure behind it just to break up that line. Let's take this fold out. So I'm doing that bright white right here next to his shoulder. So that helps give the illusion that this is a shadow and not just a weird darker spot. I'll do that all the way down the front of his cloak in different areas. Again, I'm not drawing a solid line. Sometimes I skip a part and don't add any of this bright white there. Just on little areas where I think it would be really interesting to have. And then I'm going to let that kind of trail off a bit. Very similar to how we did the gross hangy bits on the haunted house last week. I might add just a few of those in here, just here and there. And the fact that I didn't go pure white anywhere in his cloak means that these highlights that I'm doing right now are really going to show up well. They're going to be nice and bright and effective. So if you go too light in the first place with your white, then this part isn't going to make any difference. You won't see any of this. And let's pop some of those highlights here on his sleeve. See, I didn't intentionally put a shadow there, but again, because it was so transparent, just putting that bright white over it makes it look like that's a shadow with a fold. And if your arm is looking too solid, like I think it looks a little flat, I can take this and come up out of the shape and smooth it in. And now his sleeve has a little bit of a fold there. And I know someone's going to ask me where you should put the highlights. And I think I already told you once in this video. Anyway, I know I tell you all the time, put them wherever you like. The way you overlap the light and the dark is going to help insinuate the different folds and shadows. Trying not to puff out his sleeves too much. I don't want to make him look like Anne of Green Gables, the spooky version. All right, let's pop a little highlight right here on the top of his sleeve, and I think we're ready to finish up his hand. And you guys know, I always tell you, especially when we paint in black and white like this, if there's something you don't like, please don't just throw up your hands and get frustrated or just say, oh well, and deal with it. Paint over it. So if you painted that hand and you hate it, let it dry, paint it black, do it again. You can do it as many times as you like. And I forgot to give him just a little bit of a highlight right here. All right, now we're ready for his hand. Now, since I did the white on his hand first, we're gonna do some black now. Cleaned my brush, dried it on my paper towel, some matte medium and some black. I'm gonna go fairly dark with my black here. It's still gonna be on the transparent side, but not solid black. So again, kind of that loose pressure. Notice how I'm laying my brush kind of flat. I'm not doing it like this. I'm just gonna dust under here and let the paint do what it wants to do. It may be in little streaks. It may be in little kind of specks. And I kind of like the specks because it helps it look like bone. I laid that down. I'm gonna grab just a little point of matte medium and just kind of smooth out a little bit of it. I know that matte medium just looks white right now and it kind of makes you lose track of where you are. So if that happens, just move on to another part while that dries. I'm gonna do the same thing here on the underside of his thumb. And this finger right back here, I'm gonna kind of cut that off and overlap some of it, particularly at the top here where it would be shadowed by the top of his hand, and maybe right here under his thumb. I'm gonna thin that down more, get very, very thin. And right here where his hand meets his cloak, I'm gonna pull just a tiny bit of a shadow. I mean, that's really it. His hand is super simple. I'm gonna pick up the tiniest bit of a very thin white, and on this back finger, on the bottom side, I'm just gonna give the slightest indication of a highlight there. That's it. His hand is done. I told you that wasn't gonna be painful. All right, our ghost is done. I'm pretty happy with how he turned out. So I'm gonna get some white with matte medium. I want it to be kind of thin and transparent like his cloak here, and I'm gonna sign it. And there's our super spooky Halloween ghost. I hope you enjoyed painting this with me and learning how we can achieve highlights and shadows using only 2 colors without mixing them at all. Leave me a comment below and let me know how you like these techniques. If you're ready to keep painting with me today, check out these two videos right here. Thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.